Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Excellent. A little fire in the belly for a Saturday morning. Welcome to UVA, and let me welcome you to the Driverless Future, asking the big questions. My name is Lewis Nelson, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the Associate Provost for Academic Outreach here at the University of Virginia. Now, today's event finds its genesis more than 6 months ago as a conversation between research faculty, public officials, and local entrepreneurs. The conversations hovered in the space between enthusiastic optimism for innovation and a safer future and the deep understanding that seasons of disruption and change can be fundamentally destabilizing. Autonomous vehicles are going to dramatically transform the way cities function. While many see these technologies as introducing extraordinary efficiencies and increased safety, others are more cautious about their impacts and the futures that these suggest. And while the first experiments are already well underway, most research is framed around the successful integration of this new technology into the complex systems that govern very large cities. But there is much that we don't know about how this future impacts the majority of American cities, cities like ours. As a small city with a progressive ethos and the advantage of a major research university, Charlottesville presents an extraordinary opportunity to examine the ways that these new modes of transportation will impact small and mid-sized cities, not only physically, but also socially. So to that end, the Mayor of Charlottesville, the City of Charlottesville, the Office of the Governor, the Autonomous Systems Center for Excellence, and the Virginia Secretary of Technology have partnered with the University of Virginia and Perrone Robotics to host this day-long conversation about the ways that autonomous vehicles could transform our city and others like it in Virginia and across the nation. Now, today's event is a public conversation, not an academic conference, which means that we're going to focus less on what we do know and more on what we do not yet know. How will this future impact the physical design of cities, large and small? What is the future impact of this technology on community well-being? And how can public policy address those impacts? How will autonomous vehicles impact public transportation systems? How can we best prepare the economically disenfranchised for this coming future? This conversation will help identify critical research still required for cities like Charlottesville to best prepare for this new future. Now, reflecting the University of Virginia's commitment to public inquiry, our collaboration began this summer with a series of intentional engagement events with two specific communities: single working parents and the elderly. These conversations were spearheaded by Tanya Denkla-Cobb, the director of our UVA's Institute for Environmental Negotiation, and with volunteer support from Cody Fleming, who I just saw a second ago. Thank you very much, Cody, for serving as our volunteer local expert. Tanya, Cody, and their staff initiated a number of public conversations at Charlottesville's Senior Center through the summer and at other locations across the community to introduce autonomous vehicles and to ask the public what they wanted to know about their potential living conditions in this new future. Representatives from these public conversations have joined us today, and we're really glad you're here. Another outcome of this conversation has been a collaboration, a predictive investigation between the faculty from the University of Virginia and staff from the City of Charlottesville to better forecast the policy and infrastructure changes that are required to realize the health, well-being, and economic benefits throughout our community. And for this, I'd like to thank City Manager Maurice Jones and his staff and their willingness to make large data sets available to research faculty at UVA's Center for Transportation Research. These data sets include data on public transit, on traffic patterns and traffic count, signal timing, roadway incidents, and parking data that will be used as a foundation for research on existing conditions and predictive modeling here in Charlottesville. Our city's willingness to share this data will quickly foreground Charlottesville as a critical case study in current and future transportation research here at UVA and by our research partners across the country. And I'm also very pleased to say that that data set, the use of those data sets, have already found their way into some predictive design modeling in the School of Architecture. Lucia Finney is running a studio this semester based on City of Charlottesville's autonomous future. Today's event is framed around a series of 4 one-hour moderated conversations on the subjects of technology and economics in the morning, and urban design and community well-being this afternoon. The first 2 sessions will be followed by lunch and then remarks from both Mayor Mike Signer and Governor Terry McAuliffe. And as long as you've registered for today's program, you're welcome to join us for lunch, which will be held right upstairs. In addition to these 4 open conversations, Perrone Robotics has agreed to provide an autonomous vehicle demonstration, which will be running a circuit from a route here on grounds at Darden. Perrone has also brought with them a few earlier models as well, a bit of a petting zoo of autonomous vehicles, if you will. Those of you that are interested in riding in an autonomous vehicle are encouraged to wait for a turn as the car is operating. And I'll just sort of say, you all parked in the parking garage right here. We're at one end of Darden. The parking lot from which the demonstrations are happening and the petting zoo is located is at the other end. So you just go outside and just kind of walk to the right until you can't go anymore, and then you'll see cars without any people in them moving around. Terrifying. Let me close by offering a few words of thanks. First, to the Darden School of Business for offering to host us today, and for their extraordinary staff. They've been remarkably flexible. I'd like to thank also Becca White from UVA's Department of Parking and Transportation. Becca was an essential ally in this work, and her patience and creativity helped us navigate the extraordinary twists and turns that brought us to today. And lastly, let me offer special thanks to my assistant, Amy Stoops, who was entirely unaware that conference planning was part of her job description. Today would never have happened without her careful attention and her long-suffering patience. And it is now my great pleasure to introduce UVA's president, who has tirelessly supported our efforts in community engagement and in academic outreach, and who regularly reminds us all of the public mission of this extraordinary university. President Terry Sullivan.
Good morning, and let me welcome you again to UVA. Thank you for coming here today to discuss and consider our driverless future. I'm actually standing in this morning for my Provost, Tom Katsouleas, who could not be here this morning, but who has been extremely interested in this and has helped offer the university support to this project. I think a lot of you know that I came to Virginia from the University of Michigan, where I had been Provost. Now, Michigan is the one state in the Union that is most dependent upon a single industry, that being, of course, the automobile industry. In Michigan, when you meet someone for the first time, you have the obligatory conversation about the weather. For much of the year, that's lamenting how bad it is. And that is followed by the inevitable question, what do you drive? It is an important element of identity. In fact, when I was interviewed for the position of Provost, the president of the university asked me to meet her at the airport and drive her to the location for the interview. I later discovered that was to ascertain whether I drove an American-made vehicle, an unwritten but important qualification for the job. Well, now we see that the millennials, the 18-year-olds who are coming to join us as first-year students every year, often do not even have a driver's license. The number of teenagers getting driver's licenses has been dropping. We don't permit first-year students to have cars, but they can have cars in their second year. And yet we find that even as our student body has grown a little larger, the number of cars that are registered has dropped. There is a change in the way the younger generation seeks to get around. That's one of the reasons that I think this is such a timely topic for the university and for the city of Charlottesville. I know that if you're ever on University Avenue on any Friday afternoon, you won't believe me that the number of registered cars has dropped. That is what our data show. So this academic forum on autonomous vehicles is going to look at how the emerging technology of driverless cars can transform a small and medium-sized city such as Charlottesville. This is important because much of the current work is going on in the nation's largest cities. But most of the nation's people don't live in the largest cities. This conference is the first of its kind, and I think it's also notable because it's going to have an emphasis on the broader societal impacts of driverless cars. Look at all the people in Michigan who will lose a sense of identity if we now have driverless cars. That's perhaps a bit of a humorous example for those of us here in Virginia, but it is true that for many people, identity and the car have been closely associated with each other. We have faculty here from both the School of Engineering and the Department of Urban Planning, who I believe can add a lot to this conversation. This conference today is a public-private partnership. This is an example of the kind of collaboration that lets us work through quality of life issues with our fellow citizens. And so with that in mind, I want to thank the City of Charlottesville for co-sponsoring this event with us, and thank Mayor Michael Signer. Mike brought this idea to Tom Katsouleas, and in so many ways it is his brainchild. Paul Perrone, CEO of Perrone Robotics, is also a co-sponsor, and he's here today. Thank you so much, Paul, for bringing your research and development into our backyard, and for bringing your driverless cars and the petting zoo here today. I encourage all of you to take the opportunity to ride on the closed course we have set up today, thanks to Paul's generosity. The Commonwealth of Virginia is another co-sponsor for today's forum, and later on today you will hear from Governor Terry McAuliffe. Also with us is Virginia Secretary of Technology Karen Jackson to lend her expertise and to moderate two of our panels. We've had outstanding support from the state in this area. We want to thank our state government partners for recognizing this as a potential growth area for Charlottesville. And not just Charlottesville, by the way. This will have application for many other mid-sized communities across the Commonwealth. I also want to thank the Darden School for hosting the event, and thank our experts from around grounds and around the country who have come to share their knowledge and their vision for the future. Lewis Nelson, Associate Provost for Academic Outreach, and Amy, of course, deserve our thanks for having organized this event. And now I'm pleased to introduce Paul Perrone. Paul is an industry leader and a visionary whose company, Perrone Robotics, is providing autonomous vehicle technology to car manufacturers. He is the inventor of a general-purpose robotic software platform known as MAX, and is now leading the company's effort to commercialize MAX for widespread adoption. Music fans here today, as well as car aficionados, will probably be most interested to know that Paul worked with the musician Neil Young to automate his extended electric range 1959 Lincoln Continental, which now goes by the name LinkVolt. Paul has more than 14 years of autonomous vehicle experience and more than 20 years of high-tech industry experience. He earned his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Rutgers University in 1992 and his master's degree in electrical engineering from UVA in 1995. And so he is a who, and we welcome him home. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, President Sullivan and Professor Nelson. I do want to say that although we do have a petting zoo out there, we highly encourage that you not attempt to feed the robots. We do not know what they'll do. So when I was 10 years old, I was spending part of my summer vacation at my grandfather's house in Oak Glen, New Jersey. Oak Glen was a small town on the west side of southern New Jersey, and there wasn't very much to do at times. So I occasionally took to drawing at an old dining room table that my grandfather converted into a place to build puzzles, plastic models, play games, and to draw. And despite the eye strain that came from trying to draw beneath a vintage 1970s fluorescent desk lamp, I managed to crank out some sketches of what the future might eventually look like. And after my grandfather passed away and we cleared out his house, I found one of these drawings. And I was surprised to see a drawing of a spacious car with people in it, but nobody was driving. This robot car also had some necessary creature comforts in it from the perspective of a 10-year-old's mind, such as an Atari 2600 video game console, a freezer to store Otter Pops brand popsicles. You might know what those are. And as I recall, I think there was a small swimming pool either on the roof or being tugged behind the car. It was a typically humid inland Jersey summer. My grandfather didn't run the air conditioning units all the time, so this had a profound influence on the future vision of automotive design. But later on in 2004, I started creating my first actual driverless car, about 13 years ago. And I've been working in the space ever since. And more recently, I've been reflecting on that drawing from 38 some odd years ago, so I've just dated myself. And in the driverless car space, we talk a lot about safety and the enormous economic boon that will be brought about by this industry, and those are important topics. But it's interesting to introspect and try to figure out what was going on in the mind of a 10-year-old. It certainly wasn't safety or money that was on my mind back then. Rather, from the simplicity of my point of view back then, it was that A, being stuck in a car is boring. B, being stuck in a car for long trips is even more boring. C, I need entertainment. D, I need food and snacks. These are important things. And on long trips, I really need all the things I would want to do at home with me in the car, which apparently includes taking a dip in a swimming pool. But we didn't own a swimming pool, so that was clearly pure fantasy. But why was the car driverless? My parents or grandfather could have been driving. I could have drawn in a chauffeur. And I think after all these years, I finally got it. It's about two things: living your life and empowerment. So what are these two things? Living your life. The robot car I drew would allow Dad to take a nap, Mom to read a book, and Grandpop to play a game with me. But really, in general, would let us as a family do whatever we normally do at home together. We'd not waste our life sitting forward and staring straight ahead, not looking at each other, confined to our seats with seat belts as if in some sort of straitjacket. Being stuck in a car wouldn't be boring anymore. We'd be entertained, we'd have more time together. We'd be free to live our lives again as we did when not in a car. And as an adult, I see the purity of this simple vision for driverless cars. It may be, in fact, the key benefit for driverless cars. Yes, the added safety is critically important. But perhaps the real benefit is reclaiming and essentially extending our lives. And to think about this, the average American spends over an hour and a half each day driving, which works out to about 38,000 hours over an average lifetime. And that equates to about 4.3 years of driving nonstop, 24/7. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's 4.3 solid years of our life driving. And we probably spend twice that just being in a car, whether we're being driven or driving. So driverless cars give us a significant portion of our life back. We might look at driverless cars as extending our lifetime an extra 4+ years. And in that time, we can choose to work, play, sleep, or have more time with our families. Driverless cars give us more of our life to live the way we want to live it. A second advantage of driverless cars is empowerment. In the mind of a 10-year-old, a robot car would take me to where I want to go. As a kid, my robot car could take me wherever I'd want to go, whenever I'd want to go, without requiring an adult to drive me. At least that's what I imagined. Whether or not my parents would have actually let the robot car take me on that trip didn't factor into the calculus. But today, that's the litmus test I keep in mind as I myself now design and build driverless cars. When will I feel like the car is safe enough to put my own child in the car and let it drive him somewhere? It's hard to even imagine this, ever letting it happen for physical security and other reasons. But will we let driverless school buses take our children to school? Will we let driverless emergency vehicles take us and our children to hospitals in the event of an emergency? Will we let driverless cars take our kids to soccer practice when we just can't drive them? I use the example of putting children into driverless cars because it tends to drive a higher standard and expectation. And once driverless vehicles reach that standard, think about the empowerment it will actually offer. Not only may we let our kids get transported to soccer practice in a driverless vehicle, but the elderly and people with disabilities will now have more freedom of mobility as well. Anybody can go wherever they want to go, whenever they want to get there. Initially, the cost of driverless vehicles will be higher. But as we've seen with computers and cell phones, widespread adoption of a technology always puts more power in the hands of individuals that once was only affordable by the wealthiest. It may take time. But as the technology is being extended not only to cars, but to lower-cost golf cart-sized and personal short-range transportation vehicles, the cost of owning or using a driverless vehicle is going to decrease. And what's more, on-demand driverless taxis and cars will make cost to the individual even more manageable. Over time, buying a basic driverless vehicle may cost as much as it does to buy a computer, and paying for a driverless vehicle ride may cost as much as it does to buy a can of soda. Driverless vehicles will empower more people with more freedom of mobility. And the freedom that comes from living more of our life and the freedom that comes from more empowerment is, in my opinion, central to the benefits and reasons for pursuing driverless cars. But this matters little unless we know driverless cars will be safer to drive. So, will driverless cars be safer? The answer is yes. These cars will ultimately drive safer than human drivers. And sometime in the not-too-distant future, we don't know when that may be, driverless cars may become nearly impervious to accidents. Driverless vehicles have and will have sensors all around them, on every surface of the vehicle, that can see things no pair of eyes on a swiveling human head in one seat of a car can possibly see. What's more, these sensors can and will be able to see in all sorts of conditions and situations that we can't match in human capability. Sensors that can see warm-bodied deer before we do, night vision sensors, sensors that see better through fog and rain than we do. All in a vehicle with computers that have reaction time much better than our own. Driverless vehicles will be safer. Driverless vehicles will eventually become nearly impervious to accidents. That's the hypothesis. The road to nearly impervious driverless vehicles will not be without bumps in the road. The pathway to safer commercial flight was a long one. Many flapping winged attempts at air travel ended in failure. And even the founding fathers of aviation, the Wright brothers, experienced tragedy in their early trials along the way. Such hiccups along the path of development are often the case with any sort of technology pioneering that involves new forms of mobility or large physical structures of some sort. These are the risks humanity takes to make a better world. But in the end, we all stand to benefit and involve. So in closing, 38 years ago, when I was sketching out what a robot car might look like in the sweltering heat of a dining room at my grandfather's house, and as I think about that, I may have actually been hallucinating from the heat at the time. So I'm not sure if what I was thinking about then would ever translate into something that would become a reality someday. And 13 years ago, when I started to build my first driverless vehicle, it was for the now historic 2005 DARPA Grand Challenge race of autonomous vehicles across the Mojave Desert. I wasn't sure if such cars would be hitting the public roads anytime soon then. That was 13 years ago. And here we are, 13 years after that event, with technology that has already begun to drive better and safer in many situations than we can. And we are improving it every day. I've borne witness to the doubling of improvements every year, even within my own company, and technological endeavors right here in Charlottesville, Virginia. And it's happening elsewhere in Silicon Valley, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and all over the world. You're now bearing witness to the proverbial tip of the iceberg for a revolution in how human beings will soon achieve a freedom of mobility, first across their own local roads, then across the country, eventually across the planet, and ultimately maybe across the universe and space. I just think it's a wonderful time to be alive, and it's a wonderful time to be participating in this mobility freedom revolution. And it's particularly wonderful to be doing all of this within an environment of natural beauty and around the inherently kind and happy people of the city of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and my graduate schooling alma mater, the University of Virginia. Thank you very much.